some morning. You can put it in the lasagna tin, make it thick or thin, and do it your way. When you make bechamel and you add cheese as well, it's a morning.
You're listening to Rebecca Bowen with Quite a Stir on Radio Cardiff 98.7 FM.
Good evening, you're listening to Rebecca Bowen with Quite a Stir, talking all things food. Each week we will feature different guests, from lecturers discussing why French cuisine still dominates the globe in culinary schools, the best chefs in town talking about what they've got on offer, and doctors discussing people's relationship with food. But before delving into this week's show, I'd like to just give some feedback from last week when Chef Jake Lewis of Sonder co-hosted. Our listeners loved hearing all about his personal life especially, and how humble he was, and that he's broken down the barrier that Pontcanna is too posh to nosh there. Let's face it, most people are not posh, and it can feel intimidating or overwhelming sometimes, like not knowing how to use a fish knife, for instance. And in particular, when Chef said he welcomes City fans after a game in their shorts after a game for a pint and a bite. A lot of people were shocked by that, and they cannot wait to visit. We all like to go to nice restaurants. We don't dance on the table Coyote Ugly style and twirl our knickers in the air. It's not that we don't know how to behave in nice restaurants. It's just sometimes we can feel a little bit uncomfortable because the average hard-working person like myself is not posh. And I think Sonder is a great place for everyone. Well done, Chef. Another question I've been asked by culinary students regarding the Tuna Party Masterclass is when a ticket's being released and at what cost, so they can save their pennies up. Is there a how-to pamphlet explaining how to break down the recipe book, like a how-to with Sonder sort of thing? So if you are listening, Chef, can you let us know, and I will update it on my webpage. Now then, on to this week's show. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Kerry, Rees, Senior Lecturer of Gloucestershire University, talking about the Body Project. And he's a big 80s fan, so hold tight for an 80s night. Welcome to the show, Dr. Kerry Rees.
Hello, thanks for the invite.
The pleasure's all mine. I'm just going to dive straight in. So the first question I have for you is, why do some people have such a complex relationship with food?
Well, there's no one easy answer to that, and it also depends on who you ask. So for example, if you ask psychiatrists or GPs, they might have a particular answer. If you asked psychologists and clinical psychologists, they might have a slightly different answer. What they sort of all agree on is that it might be a mixture of nature and nurture, so biology, but also the way that we're socialized within society as well. In terms of biology, we know that most children develop a healthy attitude towards food because their caregivers help them to manage the change from kind of soft foods into kind of more substantial foods. But for some people, this process can be kind of interrupted, if you like. So some people have a tendency to kind of reject food because they don't like the textures of that food. And some people can develop issues where they feel they're kind of afraid to swallow that food. So they perceive food as a threat. So those kinds of things can develop. We might talk about those as kind of the kind of nurture part of that, although some of those behaviours, it's debated on whether they're learned or whether they're kind of mostly kind of a product of the person themselves, individual differences. But when we think about the way that people are motivated to act within society, we might think there's a mixture of this biology, as I said, but also kind of the social aspects of their lives. As a social psychologist, I'm particularly interested in the way that the people around us influence the way that we think, feel and behave, both kind of consciously, so we can talk about those things and know we're influenced, but also non-consciously, so we're influenced beyond our awareness. So if we break that down a little bit further, we might say that people have kind of attitudes towards food, and that those attitudes are made up of thoughts and emotions, and to some degree kind of experiences and previous behaviour. But also then there's the socialisation aspect, because when people are born, they're born into particular cultures and societies, and those cultures and societies influence the way that people kind of behave, if you like, and the way that they think and feel.
course.
When we think about food, then we also need to think about the way that people look as a result of consuming particular kind of calories. From a kind of biological perspective, people need food as fuel. But food can be attached to different kinds of attitudes, if you like, and emotions that have nothing to do with the need for fuel and the need to produce glucose, if you like, within the body. So one way to think about that is, how do people acquire their attitudes? And as I said, it may be, in partly or a lot, if you're a social psychologist, due to the kind of social environment. And the social environment can be made up of your family, the people around you, your peers that you kind of are influenced and choose to be influenced, if you like. And at different points in our life, we might be influenced more directly by the people around us. It's also influenced by our kind of identity and our culture, and also in some part by religion. So rather than thinking of food as just something we consume, actually it's quite a complex behavior, if you like, and it can be related to things like ritual. So it's also related to things like good times. You know, we often celebrate
Nostalgia as
with
well.
food, and
Nostalgic eating.
is a very good example, because when we think about emotions also drive our kind of motivations to engage in particular kinds of behaviors. So we might, when it comes to nostalgia, we might remember something in our past associated with food that actually makes us feel positive emotions. So if you're as old as me, you remember prawn cocktail and Viennetta. Sorry.
70s kids.
70s. So you remember those things, and in a way you sort of romanticize those things. You have positive emotions towards those products. If you see the wrapping, if you see the product itself, even the picture, it can produce those emotions instantly, and that might promote a particular kind of behavior. So for example, I may rush out and buy this thing. If you're a younger person, you may order it online. So it's that kind of thing. But one of the things that I and the team I work with are particularly interested in is the way that kind of the media, if you like, kind of construct attitudes towards the self. How we use kind of the images and the kind of stories that we're told through advertising in the media. How do those things kind of produce particular attitudes within the person? In other words, how do we resolve this kind of tension between being a person who is different to other people, but also a person who fits in with a particular culture or peer group? And so food might be part of that, and food may also then be related to appearance, because consuming particular kinds of food produces a particular kind of shape. So food is also then becomes associated with body image, and that body image is also associated with kinds of the way we think about ourselves. So all of these things, much like a tapas, see, I got some food knowledge, is a kind of mix, if you like, of this overall attitude we have to food. Now, for some people, food is less important, but for other people, food becomes more important. You might, in a positive way, it may become part of that person's identity. They may identify as being a good cook or a chef,
nutritionalist,
or interested in nutrition, all of those kinds of things. For some people, that pushes them down a different kind of road, and they have a different relationship with food. And that could be related to this, as I said, this kind of perception of themselves. In advertising, and because people are people and they believe that everything is quite fixed really in their lives, but actually it's very transient, things change all the time. If we think about the way that women are portrayed in the media over the years, then body size and shape has drastically changed. But when you're advertising to women, all of that is kind of forgotten, and what we tend to focus on what is fashionable now. And of course for fashion houses and advertisers, that's a good idea if you can keep people moving, because it creates consumption.
But it's going very retro. I mean, the 90s was very much like Kate Moss, supermodel, and now we're back to that 50s housewife, the very curvy.
Absolutely. When you think about the 50s, and Marilyn Monroe, seen to be the most beautiful, sexiest woman in the world, generally size 14 to 16.
Yeah, was acceptable. Way.
And then in the 60s we had Twiggy, so a size 0. In the 70s we're back to a more curvy kind of figure. I'm trying to think of an example. So Barbara Windsor, for example, for people who remember those Carry On films. In the 80s we get a new phenomenon for women, where women are now seen could be muscular. So we can think of Madonna introducing this kind of idea, sort of the beginnings of what we might call fitspiration for women. Women can also be muscular. Then if we go into the 90s, we're sort of back into a kind of curvy Kate Winslet kind of shape.
And there was Kate Moss as well. They were
In the 90s, that became popular again. So we can see attractiveness is determined by whatever time we're in, and also the culture we're in. When we think about less developed countries and in Europe, weight was considered to be a very positive thing because it showed that people had enough money.
Yeah.
They had disposable income.
Absolutely.
They could consume sufficient calories. So again, attractiveness is kind of caught up with self-image. So in very many ways, food becomes a symbol of something other than just calories and fuel.
Absolutely.
When we think about, we can stretch this idea a little more, and when we think about the way that people construct versions of themselves, we might call that a kind of a self. But advertising sells us this notion that everyone should consume products and have a particular lifestyle that gets us towards being this idealized self.
Oh, yeah.
Now, of course, many of the people that we see in the media, their whole lives are around being a particular size and shape. Ordinary people with jobs and families and dogs, they have multiple things to balance other than just their shapes. But over time, people may start to feel there's a mismatch between what they are and what they would like to be.
Pressure, of course.
And that kind of goal striving might produce negative kinds of emotions in the person, or negative self-regard. They might consider themselves in a more negative light.
Yeah.
That negativity might then cause them to withdraw from study, from work, from those kinds of relationships. When you pair that also with perfectionism, that's quite a kind of potent mix to deal with for that person. There's another aspect. So if I want to be this idealized self, there's also creeping into this, I should be like this idealized self.
Yeah.
And that might produce different kinds of emotions. So those emotions might be related to kind of anxiety. And again, that might produce particular kinds of behaviors, withdrawal from other people is often the case. So we can see food has shifted from being energy to a symbol that represents my culture, my identity, but also my personal identity. And if I'm sold this lovely story that everyone should be the same shape, and I'm not meeting this shape, this may produce negative kind of outcomes. Now, generally, we've been talking about women, and generally we can see that the shape that is supposed to be ideal for women changes across time. At the moment, we have this situation where we have this kind of hourglass ideal, but also muscular, but also quite a kind of this kind of I'm trying to think of an appropriate word for the radio. This kind of this shape that emphasizes particular aspects of the body within the hourglass figure. So you can see, so for many of these people who find this disjoint between how they see themselves and how they wish to be, this produces all sorts of opportunities for advertisers to sell them things like butt lifts and all sorts of other things.
Yeah.
So we can see that food is also a vehicle to kind of get people to do things, to get people to feel particular emotions. And what are emotions for? They prioritize particular kinds of behaviors. Spend money to alleviate those negative kinds of emotions, if you like.
And another thing about that, with the trends across the months, you've got veganuary in January. It could sort of...
It's another kind of
another way
business.
Of... But I think that's quite a positive thing in one way.
It,
Sober October,
It can be a positive thing, but I think it's also important to remember who is benefiting from these initiatives. Sometimes it's a good thing for people. Sometimes there are advertisers or influencers that also gain from this. And I think it's important, and especially for younger people, they're more aware that people actually gain from this. There's a business underlying these kinds of things. And some people who supposedly want to help us with these issues are actually making quite a large amount of money from this. And they trade on this ability for people to feel particular kinds of emotions that prioritize those kinds of self-guide behaviours.
Fabulous. Thank you for that. Is incredibly, I love that aspect and that part of the show. Let's, before we continue, have another track from Is it Go West? Was it ABC? ABC, here we go.
Good choice.
You're listening to Rebecca Bowen with Quite a Stir on Radio Cardiff 98.7 FM.
Whether you're black or whether you're white, you gotta know that the music gonna play all night on Radio Cardiff 98.7 FM. Remember, tell your friend, tell your friend, tell your friend.
Welcome back to the show. You're listening to Rebecca Bowen with Quite a Stir. I am joined with Dr. Kerry Rees of Gloucestershire University. Great choice of track from ABC. ABC. I do like to give my guests the opportunity to pick the music if they come and feature. So any future guests listening, get your tracks ready, guys and girls. All right, let's dive straight back in. So tell us about the work the Body Project team Gloucestershire are engaged in, please.
Well, my colleagues, Michelle Barden and Katerina
Hello, guys, if you're listening.
Kantartzis, I got to get her name correct. We've been involved in something called the Body Project since 2017. It's a cognitive dissonance-based intervention.
Oh, let me just stop you there just for a second. If you could explain what cognitive dissonance is to our listeners.
Cognitive dissonance is a kind of uneasy feeling you have when you realise that two of your kind of competing thoughts are at odds with each other. And this may give rise to a kind of feeling of uneasiness. A silly example would be when we see chocolate, or for me, my example then, if I see chocolate, I have two competing motivations. One, eat as much as you can. Two, oh, that's not particularly good for me.
See.
And so I need to resolve that tension in a kind of particular kind of way. Now, one way might be to stick to my original kind of thought process and kind of go, yes, I'm going to eat as much as I can, and I can eat a lot. Or I might kind of change my kind of attitude in line with my new kind of update, which is, oh, this is not particularly good for me if I consume that much. And that produces two different kinds of behaviours. One where I eat, and one where I think, well, I will eat only so much of this stuff. It's based on classic research from Festinger, 1957, I've got to remember the names then, 1957, who showed this. And using a practical sense, I'll give you an example if we've got time, is that okay?
Of course, go.
So Rokeach was studying American attitudes towards black people in the US and gathered these white American participants and said, do you believe in America? And they said, yes. And he said, do you believe in freedom and equality? And they said, yes, as part of the Constitution, yes. And then he says, well, why do you treat black people like this?
Oh, wow.
In the kind of, and this was in the 60s, so even you know, it was quite a difficult time. And what he was seeking to do was to change negative attitudes by confronting people with this disjoint in the kind of notion that, you know, this is a positive thing or this is a negative thing. So we use that kind of technique, not as dramatic as that, I should say. It's not as dramatic as that. But we use this technique, which was developed by Becker in 2012. This kind of technique has been used worldwide in different cultures and different social settings, delivered to about, well, not to, but to 4 million girls in 135 countries. And it's been shown to reduce incidences of kind of disordered eating and eating disorders by about 60%.
Wow.
So what you're doing is trying to get to people before they develop sort of problematic relationships with food. And this kind of approach has been developed and kind of has evolved over time. And it's basically geared at young women between, we kind of deliver to young women aged between 14 and 25.
Okay.
And we kind of go into schools that kind of invite us in, or we kind of push the doors open. Both Michelle and Katerina and I, we have quite sharp elbows, and we get into schools and we deliver the intervention to young women. And it involves kind of interactive group activities. And we talk about the idealised shape and weight of women in society, and we talk about, do they kind of recognise these ideals that we were talking about before ABC there. And we talk about the kind of personal costs of them psychologically. We talk about the social costs in terms of relationships with other people, and we talk about the economic costs of the country, because eating disorders cost the NHS a considerable amount and are linked to mortality, high mortality rates. So we talk about those things, and we ask them to question whether shape and size are that important in people's lives that it costs them all of these kinds of problems.
Okay.
And we talk about how advertising shapes their attitudes, and also how attitudes are shaped in the family. So maybe in the family there were certain attitudes towards shape, and then kind of passed on to the children, just like the house or the car, or the bits and pieces are passed on to people. These attitudes are also passed on to children, and those children start to frame who they think they are based on these kind of family attitudes. Now you can imagine at 13 or 14, that's a kind of a difficult point in people's lives due to kind of maturity and puberty. Then they may be more sensitive to different kinds of influences affecting the way that they feel. And if many people around them, including their friends and the peers they look up to, are kind of advocating a certain kind of shape and size, and that people that they view on social media, social influencers they admire, or the people in films they look at, or on television, if any young people do still watch television, all of those things play into this kind of idealized, but also we ask them to question whether this ideal is actually realistic. Can you actually live this lifestyle and all the things that go with it, or is this just a fantasy? And of course, with social media, it becomes very difficult to tell what is reality and what is fantasy.
Of course.
So what we're trying to do is kind of talk to those people early on in their lives, if possible, and try to help them develop motivational strategies that are actually ask them to resist the temptation to buy into these ideals. And then we hope that there'll be a less chance that they'll develop kind of problems with eating. Now, many people will have these attachment to social influences and they don't develop, so it's not a question of if I watch social influences I'm going to develop this. It's not that. But for some people are simply more vulnerable than others, and some people are simply more sensitive to kind of the thoughts of other people and the actions of other people, and those people might internalize those unrealistic ideals and cause them to behave in ways that are not necessarily positive for themselves. So we kind of, as I said, we kind of support the delivery of these sessions in school. We run 4 one-hour sessions generally, where we run through these group exercises and ask people to kind of question whether pursuing these unrealistic ideals are a good thing for them, the people around them, and society, as I've said. And then we follow up with other kinds of tasks where we ask them to question this kind of ideal, but also their relationship to their own self-perception, how they see themselves. And we try to kind of change any kind of negative feelings they have about themselves through this kind of supportive group environment.
Wow.
And when those interventions tend to work within the group, it tends to be fun for those people as well. It tends to be quite fun. And then, of course, you've got positive emotions attached to these kinds of thoughts. And hopefully there's more likelihood that these young women can then resist the temptation to kind of pursue these unrealistic ideals. So as a kind of offshoot for this, what we also tend to see is that young women who really buy into this kind of idea that have been kind of fed this kind of unrealistic ideal tend to want to tell other young women of these things. So they engage in a kind of social activism, if you like. So we've had people putting stickers on mirrors in ladies' toilets and things like that, and posting things. So there was a march in London earlier this year called Dump the Scales.
Okay.
So Michelle, my colleague, went to that and represented us at that. And that's really about, let's stop thinking about size and shape. Let's start thinking about people as people.
Okay.
It's not about, I should kind of stress as well, this is not about not wanting to look nice or wear makeup or those kinds of things. It's more about think about what is important to you and
not
put
obsessing.
put those things in their place, rather than continuously being controlled by this mismatch between where I think I am and where I should and wish to be, if you like.
And on the flip side of that, you've got some parents that might put pressure on their children to behave a certain way. They could rebel, they could stress eat, they could undereat because of certain aspects. Would it reach them as well? It's that same sort of outlook on that project?
Well, I'm kind of really glad you asked me that because as part of a new project we're starting in September.
Okay.
Oh yeah, new. As part of a new project, we're developing a pack for parents to sort of teach parents how to talk to their children in a way that doesn't cause these issues to begin. Now, of course, you have to remember the parents are also socialized with these ideals and might actually believe in these kinds of ideals as well. Yeah. So it's not about judging parents in a negative way. It's more about asking parents to think about their language and how this might affect their children or these young women, if you like. So we'll develop this project in the next year. We'll ask parents to join us on a panel. And we'll have discussions with parents of children of sort of all ages, and we'll co-produce materials, and then we'll try it with parents to see how that works. And based on that feedback, then we'll kind of resolve any issues that we can see, and refine those materials, and then we'll make those freely available to parents. Now, I should stress that this is in Gloucestershire. We were funded by the Care Board, the Integrated Care Board in Gloucestershire. We were the first team in the country to be funded with this work.
Fantastic.
And I should blow my own horn here for the team. We were also mentioned in a recent all-party parliamentary group report. Wow. So that's good, and we've been asked to kind of join that kind of panel as well. So what we try to do is work with NHS partners to devise these kinds of free materials to make these materials freely available to parents. But also we'll be delivering to schools, and also we've got a project where we're going to try to develop in conjunction with psychiatrists and clinical psychologists, develop a version of this, as I said, for parents, but also for people on the wait list. Now, I don't know if you know this, but people who are on the wait list before they get treatment for eating issues can stay on there a considerable time. So we're trying to develop a tool, if you like, that will deliver this intervention to people in that particular kind of group, and basically try to equip them with ways where they can self-help out of the wait list.
Or anorexia, or is that both?
This would be more restricted eating, but we're very busy. We're also piloting a project with a weight management clinic, and that would be related to people who are in larger bodies. Okay. So we're extending the original body project with, I should say, with kind of consultation with people within this country, teams within this country from Everybody Consulting, but also with Eric Stice, Professor Eric Stice, who originally was the person who originally developed this. So we're not kind of just making it up as we're going along. Yeah. We kind of use a series of evidence-based steps to improve, and also you have to kind of evolve the delivery to meet the demands of new groups, because obviously younger people have different kinds of pressures compared to people of my age, if you like, and so we're evolving that project.
And let's talk about premenopausal symptoms where weight just piles on without even doing anything.
Well, when we look at the way that advertising is now geared towards women of all ages, I call it the Helen Mirren effect. Women are now supposedly kind of perfect all of their lives, regardless of any hormonal changes, regardless of children, regardless of these things, they're still supposed to be a particular shape and weight. So we're also working with somebody. Got a PhD project, Chrissy Parker, and we're looking at how we can change people's attitudes towards themselves in terms of their weight and shape.
Self-acceptance.
It is about self-acceptance. You beat me to it.
Sorry.
No, it's about self-acceptance rather than body positivity. It's about acceptance, because acceptance means you're not going to feel those negative emotions. Absolutely. I should point out as well, it can be a battle, continuous battle. Yeah. It's not just about you have the intervention, it's over. It's more about you continuously have this mindset and you develop this strategy to protect yourself, if you like, from these kind of invasive negative thoughts. And of course, as you said, for adults, we're also developing a version of the body project for adults. Amazing. And especially for, as I've said, for women. And ironically, the same is now true for men. If you look online, there's all these kinds of adverts that say, fit at 50 and 60 if you're a man. So men are also under this pressure, but we have a range of projects for women at the moment. So we're tackling lots of different topics under the umbrella of the Body Project, but aimed at a number of different kinds of groups, if you like.
It sounds absolutely amazing. I can't wait to hear more. But right now, we're going to hear another one of your lovely tracks from the 80s.
Nice.
Radio Cardiff, bringing the house down.
Welcome back to the show. You're listening to Rebecca Bowen, joined with Dr. Kerry Rees of Gloucestershire University, talking about the Body Project. And my next question is, we've been discussing women predominantly. Let's have a chat about men, different ages of men. How are you going to sort of battle that one?
Well, as I said, we're starting a new project in September, and part of that will be trying to reach young men. So most research has primarily focused on women, because that's where many of the issues with eating disorder were kind of initially recognised, if you like. But as time has gone on, then we've seen a higher incidence of disrupted eating in men also. So to kind of resolve this, we're going to kind of adapt the Body Project. Now, there is a version of the Body Project for men called More Than Muscles. Okay. And we've tried to look at using this within schools. What we found was the language was quite US-centric, so it uses Americanisms rather than kind of usual British kind of words. But also, in many ways, the examples they use are not fitted for kind of today's young men. And many of the terms they use, you know, as I'm conducting the interviews with school-age men, young men, I'm finding all sorts of interesting words to describe men. But I'm also finding out about the social influences that influence them in their kind of daily lives. What's kind of interesting on one level, which is not part of the project, but how image concerns and size are also related to things like toxic masculinity, if you like, attitudes towards women, which might be a different kind of part of the research. But in terms of men's attitudes to their kind of in terms of their self-perception, what we tend to see in women is that they want a reduction in kind of weight, whereas for men they tend to want a greater weight in the form of muscle.
I see.
So now, of course, that can lead to all sorts of self-medication.
Yes.
And all the related health risks that go along with that. So in the same way we would like to head off problems for young women, we would like to head off problems for young men. So we'll kind of adapt the script and the intervention for young men to make it relevant to those young men. Now, it's not about stopping men going to the gym. It's more asking those young men to question why they go to the gym, and also should their whole self-worth, their idea about themselves, be based on how muscular they are. And again, when you think about how we talked about perimenopausal women and menopausal women, those changing hormones, it's the same for men.
Is it really?
At different points in their lives, they will have different levels of hormones which influence their general disposition to create muscle.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
But advertisers, they don't necessarily factor those kinds of things into the message. All men should be a V shape.
Yes.
That kind of V shape, if you like, and muscularity. And just in the same that women of all ages are now, you know, bombarded with advertising that says you should be the same hourglass figure all your life, regardless of hormonal changes. The same is happening to men. You know, these kind of fit at 50 kind of ads, men. So, you know, I'm quite, you know, I'd like to seek out these ads and see what they're saying, what images they're using, to see the kinds of messages, so I can talk about these things when we run the interventions, and also to understand what our kind of participants in the intervention are kind of exposed to in terms of advertising. So we kind of, at the moment, we're piloting this, or we will be piloting this version for young men, and we also hope to deliver these courses. We're in consultation at the moment with people in Wales, that's all I'm going to say, with people in Wales, to kind of start delivering in Wales as well, which I'm particularly excited about, being Welsh, I don't know if you noticed. And so...
Pick up the Rhonda.
Oh yeah, Rhonda posse. So I'm particularly interested in kind of delivering to young men in the valleys, because when I drive around the valleys, I notice that, many young men are clearly going to the gym a lot, shall we say, and potentially self-medicating. And I just do wonder about the costs for those young men, and how that might play out in the rest of their lives, and their relationships with their own sons, if you like, how they'll kind of use the attitudes for themselves and also pass these attitudes on to their sons.
That's not an easy project. Good luck with that one.
It's not an easy project, but at the same time, what you're trying to do, I totally agree, it's not an easy project. And as I say, we're very keen to say, it's not about not looking nice, it's not about being fit, it's more a question of how can we reduce the psychological costs to people who pursue unrealistic ideals. That's really what we're talking about. We're also saving some money in for yourself, and the kind of economic costs for the country for people who require kind of help, if you like, and support. So we're working with males at the moment to co-produce this new kind of intervention script. We've already conducted some interviews with young men, and they were great to work with. And then we have a series of 9 more interviews with focus groups to conduct with young men, and we're going to gather that information, feed into the new version of the intervention script for men, go into schools and into university, and what we'll do is kind of trial these interventions.
The workplace as well, because there are many adults, male adults, that have that kind of issue.
I think you raise a valid point, because many workplaces are geared around appearance. So we also have, we're working with somebody called Zoe Harwood to look at these effects within dancers.
Oh.
So dancers, obviously, they're in the public eye continuously. They are well known. They're a well-known group to have problems with self-perception leading to kind of eating disruptions. So we will also take it into particular workplaces, and we may need then to evolve it according to the workplace. So you can imagine very similar kinds of emotions may be evoked if you work in a gym, for example, because you're sort of a role model. In the same way the dancer is a sort of role model in many ways. So we may look at those different kinds of jobs, but what we do obviously as researchers, we look at these kinds of ideas, then we kind of conduct research, then we kind of design the intervention, then we test the intervention, and then we go through this kind of rigorous process of testing. And so what we're trying to do always is evolve the body project, keeping true to the original ideas related to cognitive dissonance, but make it more applicable to different kind of groups. And as you say, in the workplace is an ideal example, especially people in the public eye. They may feel even more pressure, if you like. And I think it is normal or is usual to feel that pressure when we go into Christmas parties or other kind of celebrations in the year, depends, on your kind of culture. Then you feel under pressure to look in a particular way. So we all feel this pressure, which is kind of usual. If you're going on holidays, you feel that kind of pressure. We're not talking about, that kind of pressure. We're talking about when it leads to kind of particular long-lasting negative emotions for people that might cause disrupted eating or that's what we're talking about here. And trying this kind of soft intervention, trying to kind of change people's mindsets and attitudes, if you like. So basically that's what we're going to do.
You want to get to the root of the problem, which is fantastic. You want to get to that cause.
Well, we can't change advertisers because, in certain ways. Now, I should say that some advertisers do make an effort to address these kinds of idealized. You'll see that people of different weights and shapes are often now included in media. Yes. There are also kind of campaigns and debates by particular organisations. So the Dev Project is something else where that's also sort of about body acceptance, but also it's more about showing people how the people we see in the media are basically airbrushed within an inch of their lives. So it's about knowing what is real and what is not real. So although it's a difficult topic to work in, a difficult area to work in, we've seen this spike in kind of disrupted eating and disordered eating, and what we're trying to do is stop the next load of people from kind of having those, or the next cohort of people having to kind of deal with those issues. At the same time, these interventions will, be aimed at those people who are kind of having problems at the moment. So we have a wide range of kinds of strategies, but as you say, it is an incredibly complex.
It is
No
complex.
one
No, it's not
solution,
easy.
no one solution, no silver bullet for a very complex problem. And it all starts with our kind of relationship with what is food.
Absolutely.
Is it fuel? Is it a symbol? Is it something that's part of our identity?
Yeah, I'm loving hearing all about this. Before we delve in any further, let's hear another 80s track.
Radio Cardiff 98.7 FM, the sound of the capital.
FM.
Just to wrap up the show, it's been fantastic with Dr. Kerry, Rees. I've loved every minute of it. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I do want to get one more question in. So finally, if people are having issues with eating, what should they do?
In the first instance, talk to trusted sources. So, for example, your GP, look on the NHS website, but also look for kind of recognised charities such as Beat. They provide fantastic support and information.
That is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm going to choose the last song.
Fair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to plug a band that I absolutely love. I'm going to Camden to watch them next weekend. They are supporting Dodgy in Dingwalls. This is Crisis by 4 Act Riot. Love you, boys.